Welcome to the Zealous Podcast. I'm your host, Rocky Snyder, and well, this week I get to invite a friend back on the show. His name's Mike Potenza. Mike has been one of the top strength conditioning coaches in the NHL. He's been spending 16 years with the San Jose Sharks until recently. He decided to trade things up a little bit, and now he is the director of performance for the NBA champion Golden State Warriors. Not much more of a commute from being in Silicon Valley up to the Bay Area, so that's a nice thing. We're going to find out a few things about the difference in switching over from NHL to NBA and the learning curve that's occurring and what he is experiencing with the Golden State Warriors. I hope you enjoy. Be sure to subscribe. Mike, I can't be more excited to get you back on the show here, but last time, for the listening audience, if you're not familiar with Mike Potenza, you got to go into the archives and check out one of the very first podcast episodes we had in our first year. Mike's been the head coach, strength coach for the San Jose Sharks and one of the leading strength coaches in the NHL, but now he's changing hats and he's with the Golden State Warriors. Yes, I will say the NBA champion Golden State Warriors, who beat my Celtics last year. But whatever. Okay, we're just going to get past that. I don't want to talk anymore about it. Hey, Mike, what's it like, man? What's it like going from the NHL, San Jose Sharks in the Shark Tank with all those bruisers on the ice, great guys, and going over and working with the Warriors?
Yeah, well, two things stood out right away. One, they smell better and they have all their teeth. So that's I guess that's a step. I guess that's a step up, right? But it was, things that stood out right away was the attention to detail, to the injury concerns that they have, and the big injury concerns in basketball I'm finding is that the ankle, the knee, and the back, from all the pounding, right, from rolling ankles, spraining ankles, and all those kinds of things, right? So that's been interesting to learn and to kind of, in hockey, you're worried about the pelvis, you're worried about the hips, the groin. That's really the hot spot, and concussions, obviously. But in basketball, the hot spot's the ankle. So I'm relearning and learning a lot more about that anatomy, right, and how to physically train it and put an injury prevention program together. So the other cool thing is, like, they're fast. Like, they're obviously big men, but they can move. Like, they're not just slow, trying to logging down the court. These guys are very athletic, obviously, and I guess maybe your listeners will be like, yeah, Mike, they're pros, but when you're right in front of them, it's very different. Just like in hockey, like if you're by the glass and watch them skate, it's very different than watching it on TV or being high up in the stands watching them move. So that was pretty cool. They're a very competitive group, which is awesome. The energy is awesome around this group for me. So for me to come in and see that is exciting, and know that they want to prepare and they want to utilize the gym to kind of stay strong and sharp and whatnot. So.
All right. Well, you got my heart pumping when you started talking about the foot and ankle, because, I kind of geek out on that stuff. So what is it that you're discovering or learning? What are the things that are just kind of like getting your hair to stand on end when we're talking about ankle strength, mobility, coordination, movement? What is it?
Yeah. It's there's at least a multifaceted approach that I've come to see and kind of build some program and build the programming on. It's one, they definitely need balance, and I think balance isn't the fact that they're going to stand on one leg and juggle 5 basketballs or do single leg hops on a balance beam or anything like that. But the big thing for them is that they have that proprioceptive kind of that proprioceptive kinesthetic sense that they can feel the ground in awkward positions to really buy themselves some time, maybe neuromuscularly, to get the foot strong and planted on the ground. If not, then they would kind of roll it, right, or injure it because they're in an awkward position. So we take a lot of time with balance and dynamic balance, where you may be standing on one leg on a foam pad and then moving your head left to right. So now you incorporate that visual component, and it kind of tries to throw or challenge your balance a little bit in a different way. Or they may be, single leg hop and stick on a foam pad. So now they have to create You have to create that stability when they land, but also not just using the ankle, but also using the hip. And oh, I got a visitor here, my dog. So, so there's that aspect of it. The other aspect of it, the second prong of the approach really is like, is calf and Achilles. We all know how deadly that injury can be for them, obviously, with one of our biggest players with Clay and how that affected him for a year. But with that, you want to keep you want to promote an environment that has tension on that Achilles, right? So it can respond elastically and quickly, but it also can generate and able to absorb a lot of tension, whether it be going up for a rebound and coming down on one single leg, right? So there's that component. The calf is obviously very important. There's multiple exercises we do in single leg stance for calf raise and calf strengthening. And then there's a lot of other dynamic balance things on wobble board, but wobble board where you're giving them feedback and you're actually pushing in one direction and they're stabilizing in the other direction, right? A lot of it, and there's the commonalities of these types of exercises with hockey. I'm finding too is that these players get to get really good in these single leg positions, both types of athletes, but they also need to learn to know how to utilize their glutes more in certain positions, especially when in a split stance, right? Sometimes they're so athletic they can get away with it, but we're trying to incorporate, okay, how does your interaction with the ground affect what's going on in the pelvis in terms of glute firing, and then also core stability. Is your core on or not? And can you disassociate that top half from the bottom half? So long-winded answer.
No, it's totally good because it just brings up more kind of questions for me. Like, let's just talk about the Achilles and the calf. Do you have some type of process to go from one player to the other where you're evaluating that? I know we're talking into the training staff too, but being the director of performance and having all your strength coaches under you and all that, but you're obviously communicating with the medical director, and the athletic trainers. Do you guys, how do you go about that? How do you assess the quality of ankle strength, mobility, and movement to send up red flags going, okay, so we don't want to have the same thing happen like we did with Clay. So what do we do?
Yeah. So in terms of an assessment, like kind of an intake, you want to know ankle range of motion, right? And the common one to do is something called knee to wall, right? So toes are against the wall, can your knee touch it, right? And then you just keep backing away until the heel lifts. And then that would kind of put the stop on the test, right?
So you're looking for ankle dorsiflexion and therefore length of the calf.
Yeah.
And maybe tension of the
mobility.
Okay.
Yeah. Is there any blocking in the anterior side of the ankle joint or the subtalar joint? And then that kind of starts it there, right? And then we take even more steps to look more at like, okay, is there a lot of tension on the quad, right? So we'll measure like Thomas test and hip flexor length and internal and external rotation, because you want to make sure that all the joints of the system, all the chains, the links of the chain up the line are mobile, right? If we get one link that stops, then maybe that's kind of going to be the problematic area. So those are intaked and recorded frequently, right? Especially with guys who get hurt. That knee to wall or that dorsiflexion ability is always tracked, because some guys can come in, let's say 3 is a bad score, and on one side, and he's got 10 on the other side. A lot of mobility and no mobility, right? It's like almost like putting on your parking brake just on your rear tire, right?
Yeah.
And then trying to drive. So he that particular athlete would come in, he would get worked on, and that 3 may become a 7 or a 6, right? And then we can go through our routine and any adjustments that we make. And then the next day, if he comes back in at a 3, we want to just keep on working on that. So maybe that 3 becomes daily a 4 or 5. And then over time, we kind of resolve it all together. We may not resolve it because of any anatomical changes or bony developments in the ankle from scar tissue over time and things like that. But at least it's managed. It's always kind of addressed to get to maximize what he can in terms of mobility out of that
Sure.
segment.
Or maybe there's an underlying reason why the body is trying to negotiate that or coordinate it. So maybe hunting down the root cause and not just that. But there's some concern amongst those in the industry that if we're going to try to seek out reducing asymmetries that may affect overall athletic skill performance. What's your take on that?
I think an asymmetry is going to exist regardless. I think, we're built as humans where we have certain things on one side of our body, in terms of organs. Like, not everything is stacked right in the right, order and things like that. But we have asymmetries, and for athletes, I think it gets magnified with their tasks. Especially in baseball, who a throwing athlete or something of that, or hockey, or implement sports where they're on one side all the time. I think if the asymmetry is way out of whack, or way out in left field, then yeah, you should address it for kind of longevity and injury prevention. But some of them are healthy. So, with these maybe asymmetrical ankle dorsiflexion and things like that, we know in basketball, that, like, okay, if this is not a real good score. We don't want this, because they do a lot of bilateral actions like jumping, unilateral actions like running. So if you have a really mobile left side, whether it be ankle, knee, or hip, and on a stiff right side, it's going to affect your stride, right? And it could affect, you may have a stiff ankle and a stiff hip, and it may affect your knee with patella tendonitis, right? That can most certainly happen. So you want to address those things before they become problematic, or if they're way beyond the normal healthy standard deviation between the two, right?
Sure.
So I think you should, but I don't think you have to go down the rabbit hole of making everybody symmetrical.
No, I could see that with basketball, the more ambidextrous a player can be, the more valuable they're, or the more likely they're going to be able to score, defend, and so on. Compared to, say, when you're with the Sharks, there's a certain way in which all the guys hold their sticks. It's very, in terms of that, I would say, not imbalance, but that preferred way of positioning could create even greater degrees of imbalances. That if you start screwing around with that, well, then you might be screwing around with their accuracy, taking shots to the net. But with basketball, not so much. So just going back to
to add to that, sorry. So here's how I look at it comparatively, right? So in hockey, for the lower body, from a power output standpoint in jumping, and a strength standpoint in terms of single leg squatting, I did want to get a symmetry, and like I didn't want, because skating is a two-legged action, right? Running is a two-legged action, right? Now at the same time, or they are single leg, but you have to use them both, right? So with skating, I wanted to make sure that they were able to jump and land equally on both legs, right? Single leg manner. So they weren't leaning to one side in their jump. And I also wanted to make sure the strength scores were equally, that each leg was equally powerful. The same holds true for basketball, I believe, with a single leg being equally strong, but jumping and there not being a single leg asymmetry, left versus right, that's critical as well. We can't move forward with either athlete thinking, all right, he's really powerful off his right leg. He's got a 40-inch vertical jump, but he's much more powerful off his right and landing than he is on his left, because then that left could manifest itself with an injury down the road. Now with hockey, with the caveat, I mean, yes, they were one-sided, in terms of with the stick and shooting and whatnot, but I always did, to counterbalance that, let's say they're a right shot, I always did med ball work on the other side, and maybe even filled that bucket a little bit more, just so there was some symmetry, if you will, in the musculature of the core that's rotating, them left and right. I really think that the more shots they were taking on the right side, that musculature was developed, that was responsible for them to rotate. But on the other side, it has to be trained, because if it's weak and if it's not activated, then it's not going to stabilize the core and the trunk the way you want it, for impact, for daily activities, for support and stability and all that. So it's one of the caveat in there.
Totally, yeah, without a doubt. And I think we even talked about that in the last time we got together on here, in terms of trying to create a balance, a counter rotation, counter movements, to just try to keep things where we should have them, I guess you'd say. Now, when it comes to these players that you're with, entering into a potential back-to-back championship series. Um, it's is it are you nervous in the fact that you are now wearing a much bigger hat than you were before? And yeah, what is how just from a personal standpoint, I guess, what is it like for you?
Well, there's high expectations, that's for sure, right? I
Uh-huh.
mean,
Yeah.
you're dealing with. Fortunately, I was able to deal with the best players in the world in the National Hockey League, but also now it's a bigger league. Like it's more. There's more exposure to basketball globally than I think there is hockey. I think there's more of a basketball following, and we just so happen to have the best player in basketball on our team, and two unbelievable, maybe top 10 players in the league with Clay and Draymond. So um, it's I'm excited more than I'm nervous. Um, but I always viewed myself as a mechanic in a way, right? Like these guys need a mechanic to kind of keep an eye on what their bodies and what they need to do throughout the year. So while I'm in the background, I like it that way, and I think that's my motivation why I'm not nervous is the fact that, all right, these guys, I want to give these guys everything they need to keep going. They're getting up in age, which my experience with the Sharks, we had a lot of players play well into their late 30s and some even to their early 40s. So I'm
Yeah.
comfortable with knowing, okay, this is what's this in my experience, this is what worked effectively with these types of players, and I can probably provide a lot of that. Um, but also to give them what they need from a resiliency standpoint long term. So
Yeah. Okay. So, Mr. Mechanic, you take your car into the shop for the regular checkup and a regular kind of maintenance, and there's certain things that they're always going to cover. So, if we take that analogy into your NBA team, what are the things that you're always going to check, that you're always going to cover with your athletes, and in regards to like strength and conditioning in the world that we live in?
yeah, first they most certainly need to be strong, right? That's the foundation. So when they come in here, and a lot of them are already started, right? So the foundation of the summer has been built on strength, right? And then a conditioning base, a metabolic conditioning base that has aerobic, and then it starts to introduce speed mechanics. Much like the hockey players, if you start to crush them with anaerobic sprinting and intervals, like they're gonna burn out their nervous system. It's too early for their nervous system to do it, right? And the best way to get it to link with their skill set is to do it on court. So um, that's where we are right now. We're starting to introduce some anaerobic stuff at small doses with enough rest time in between where that's not going to burn them out. But on the strength side in the gym, we're making that transition to power now. We're making that transition to a little bit heavier load contrasted with some sort of jump or explosive movement, right? And that's going to be key. Any injury prevention that they need is going to happen in the gym in the beginning of the workout too. That may be ankle, that may be hip, knee, low back for some guys, and things like that. That's a big concern that you obviously have to be aware of. We don't do much. We do some plyometric type activity, but we're not overfilling that bucket by any means. They jump all day. We really don't need to overfill that. We do want to see some strategies on how they land, both in bilateral stance and then single leg stance. That's important. And then again, if they need a little bit more jumping, if they need a little bit more top off, if you will, in the jumping area or plyometric type area, it's going to be if we see that big asymmetry, single, left to right or right to left.
Sure. Okay, so that's on your checklist. Now, you
Mhm.
bring up lower back because we already spoke about the foot and ankle and the Achilles, but with lower back strength, give me what's kind of your average recipe. Granted, everyone's going to need a little bit different movements, perhaps. You're not going to just cookie cutter for everybody, but how do you keep their lower back healthy?
Mhm. Yeah. Well, I think in my experience, it hasn't been from it has not the low back. When we say, "Oh, we got to get it stronger," or "We got to protect it," or someone's had a history of injury there, it's not because they can't do a hyperextensions for 10 with a 45-pound plate, or it's not because they're doing reverse hyper with 2 or 4 45-pound plates on there. it's internally, it's deeper, right? It most certainly deals with the structures around the spinal column that are meant for movement, but also meant for stability. And stability being the more important word I just mentioned. But so a lot of guys, even in a lot of sports and and even youth athletes, they don't know how to control their pelvis, right? They don't know how to disassociate, meaning keep the pelvis steady, upper trunk moves. And they don't know how to kind of get anterior, posteriorly tilt. And that's a function of using some of the lower abdominals and obliques in a different way. Our culture is that we know how to crunch, we know how to do abs that make you look good, but we don't know how to we don't know how to do abs that, or I say absolutely is a garbage term, but we can't do abs like that. It's going to create stability for our core, right? So we re-educate them on how to control the pelvis using your abdominal wall, how to lock it in and be stable and get other parts of your body, including the lower body, to move without moving your core or center, right? So then that creates that internal stability. And then we take it to a very athletic movement where we're standing and we're doing different patterns so that now your core is stable, right? So, and you're firing all the musculature without holding your breath in those types of positions. So
yeah, I'm so happy you say that.
That's kind of where we say, yeah. And then med ball and bigger type movements are meant for force production, so we use those for in that manner. That could be a force production type day, not a core stability type day, right?
Yeah. I'm just glad you didn't mention a whole bunch of low back exercises. You're exactly what I was imagining you would say, which is disassociation and integration, and looking at the pelvis, center of movement, how well can it move? You've already tied it into the ankle. Now you're tying it into the lower back. So give me a sense then, because it's all coming back to center. It's all coming back right into that pelvic region, because if I don't have proper movement from the place where I should have the origin of muscular contraction somewhere around my center, right, then everything else is going to suffer, and vice versa. If I don't have something coming from my extremities the way it should, then it's going to throw me off my center. So how do you look at the hip pelvic region? And yeah, what are your assessment tools with that? Are you just simply having them stand and give me a sense of disassociation of anterior posterior tilt? Are you going three-dimensional? Yeah, just take me through it if you don't mind.
So we do have the benefit of kind of the medical team, our therapists and sports medicine practitioners. We do get feedback from them on how their hips are moving, how their spinal column is moving, right? Are they stable in their lumbar? And they mobile in their T-spine? That's the big thing that we're trying to, address separately, right? We want a stable lumbar spine. We want a mobile T-spine. So we're kind of working a lot of T-spine movement in the gym so that this is locked and ask for movement at the lower segment of the lumbar, right? But we do get the information back from sports medicine, so then we can act on it. And that may take us doing some more soft tissue tools and things like that to around the hip to get more mobility. There is a hands-on component that they'll get addressed by our chiro and our soft tissue manual therapists and everybody. But we can do a little bit more in the gym too, right? To kind of free up some movement and pliability, if you will.
All right, so basically you get some good insight from your training staff, the athletic trainers, the physical therapists, and chiros. Obviously, you're coordinating with them on a daily basis. You're having meetings and you're talking about all your players and what needs to be done, and then you filter it down into your training staff. Like, which is everyone's dream. I mean, you definitely have my dream job, and I'm not going to throw up any fingers in your direction except number one, baby. Yeah, that is awesome, and it's the index finger in case anybody's seeing it. It's not the other one. But I'm just so for those trainers out there in the listening audience, those strength coaches and so on, let's just say what are your go-to moves? And I know, again, I don't want to kind of cookie cutter this, but what are your big buckets when it comes to strength moves for your NBA team in terms of like solid glute strength, the glute hamstring complex, feeding that down into the foot, ankle, upward through the torso? What are your go-tos? Like, these guys should be able to do these moves, and if they can't, then we've got to work on this stuff.
Yeah. Well, single leg, we've been working on to this point in the last 2 months. For the two handfuls of guys who've been in town with us, focusing on basketball and then obviously strength training. Like our big lower body kind of lift that incorporates the hinges of is a trap bar. I think we're trying to get big men to try to move really well in that position and understand how to stabilize the low back and how to engage with the ground. You know, now for more lower body exercise, we'll use step up quite a bit within a goblet hold or a two kettlebell or two dumbbell type hold. But with that, we want to make sure that they're just not kicking off that bottom leg. Obviously, we want them to be able to engage that top leg on the box and step through it, but also hold the top. And by holding the top on the stance leg, it actually engages triple in a way triple extension where you have the glute, you have the quad firing to support. They're not just up there with their knee bent and their quad disengaged or their glute not engaged. It gets firing through, and that kind of almost goes along with like the locomotor activity of running and sprinting. So that other leg is lifting, that hip flexor is strong at the top, and that other leg is driving through the box, and then they kind of slowly lower and step down. We'll do backwards lunging type positions. We'll do split squat type holds. We have gotten in a little bit now to the back foot elevated RFE type split squat. We don't do a lot of bilateral squatting. If we do, it's with a safety bar when we do it. Then I would say other exercises for the glutes, Rock, is that we're really picky about how we do our glute ham raise. So we want to make sure that they can eccentrically lower, obviously, but they don't break at their hips to kind of come up. We want them to come up in the straight segments from their hip, from their hip to their knee or their knee to the hip to the shoulder. So that's really important to us. Any single leg bridging type work, we want to make sure that they're breathing, obviously, because sometimes when they stop breathing when we ask them to engage their core more. So we want to make sure that they can find that firing pattern and that sequencing on that. We do single leg dumbbell RDL, obviously for balance, but also I think that's one of my favorite exercises, obviously for a hinge type movement or a lower body pulling type exercise. So I think there's a lot of bang for your buck there, especially with hamstring lengthening and how it relates to stride and sprinting and things like that. So that's incorporated as well. So
and progressionally speaking, let's take that single leg deadlift there. The way that I typically do it, and I'm curious about your approach, is that I first have them take a dowel to their back so we know that head, spine, all staying fairly immobile, and the hinging is going to occur at the hip. Can they lower down, maintaining the 3 points of contact being the back of the head, the thoracic, mid-back, and the sacrum tailbone, and then come back up again? So I really know that they have that proper hinge, and then compare it to the other side. And I might actually, of course, switch arms just to give me a little bit of understanding of their, excuse me, of their shoulder girdle. But then from there, I may actually ask them to load with one hand, typically the opposite hand of the standing leg, to fire up that nice posterior chain, that PNF path between the opposite shoulder and hip. And can they load that while the other hand still holds a dowel? And then once they show proficiency with that, and can they maintain some good upper body integrity under load, and then we can take away that dowel and maybe start to incorporate a cable, a low cable. Man, you got me choked up here. A low cable or dumbbell or whatever. What type of progressional work do you do with that? How do you progress or digress? Regress?
Well, certainly with the dowel, we do begin with a dowel and see how they can actually move with that, and then we'll start to progress to opposite. Like if you're standing on your left, you're holding the dumbbell in your right hand. That's going to be the hold with a light dumbbell that we're going to kind of incorporate there. While that's going on, we're going to incorporate we actually do that, just a walking pattern in our dynamic warm up with the single leg, reach to toe, in that pattern. And then we also kind of go from single leg RDL stance, but we press and reach our arms overhead and get that leg back. So to make sure that they're not rotating on that stance like hip, they're not rotating externally, right? Or and then we want to make sure they're squared up, but we also get it's kind of like 2 for 1. We get some shoulder blade retraction, scap retraction type work when they raise their arms overhead. So those are just warm up patterns that we'll do. And then in the gym, like you said, we're doing loaded. We're going off of the cable Kaiser cable machine that we have in single leg stance for that as well. We may get to, if it gets really good and down the line of progression, we may go 2 dumbbell, but 2 dumbbell would start like pinning it back against our ribs in a row fashion, and then going into that single leg stance. And if that gets really good, then you can go 2 dumbbells instead of, the one opposite side hold dumbbell. So
Yeah, got you. Okay.
that's
And
down
then
the line.
let's say you've got a player who is showing proficiency on one side, but is lacking somewhat on the opposite side. Do you spend more time on the side that seems to need more attention, or you just stay with, we're going to do a set on this side, a set on this side?
It's kind of a cleanup question. So sometimes when we see them falter on that particular exercise, is that they will roll, their body will open to that side, right? So they want to kind of make that the actual motion of the hip would be an external rotation, right? So you have a fixed femur, and then your pelvis is rolling off of it, right, to that side.
Yeah. So the leg that's raising back behind you, that side of it, that hip is the one that's elevated, right?
That's open. Yeah, and that one's opening, right? So you almost open your pelvis to that particular side. But so with that, we address it with soft tissue strategies. Maybe they're just super tight there and they don't have the mobility that they need. So we'll address it there. If it's a neuromuscular pattern, which it most likely is, by doing that, you almost have it's reinforced that way, right? So then we'll pull them into the dysfunction, right? So if we're going to open them up more, if that back leg is opening, by using a band around the shoulders, and then it's going to force them to push down on that and create some resistance. So now that they're square and level to the floor, right? And that's unloaded, because we're not going to load that pattern because they don't know how to do it yet, right?
Yeah.
So, and that may take a couple sets in addition to it, right?
Yeah, which would cause the standing hip to eccentrically load, to really lengthen. And once that hip comes down into alignment, and then you can tilt, and there you go. You're going to start to wake up the biggest muscle of the body, potentially reduce low back, or for that matter, Achilles, right?
Yeah, a lot of it's mobility. I think you can really address it right away with some soft tissue tricks and all the tools that are on the market and whatnot. You can definitely address it and get more mobility out of it.
Yeah, and what kind of soft tissue tools do you guys have? Obviously, sports sticks, foam rollers, massage guns, but other things?
Yep. Some vibrating foam rollers, but we got a ton of softballs. There's a larger size than softball, but it's a foam ball that Perform Better makes, and it's a real good tool. It's probably the size of, I would guess it's a little bit bigger than a softball, but it's perfect because it gets into your glutes really well. It can get into specific points of your quads. So we have that. There we have the spine balls, like the peanut, right? We have multiple of those, but Perform Better makes a larger softball size foam peanut that's black, and that's amazing. Like that's been a game changer. Like, because it's such a simple tool, but messing around on it, it's like we can get QL just by sitting on it and just a little bit of rotation, and there's a lot of relief for guys. It's amazing on the back of the neck. It hurts more than a regular size lacrosse ball peanut, believe it or not, for me at least, on the T-spine and scap area. So that's like go-to. Like it's a great tool. It's super light and it packs well. So yeah, it's great.
Yeah. All right. And I love
I look for more tools. I look for more tools that can get at your back, that you can get at the spots you can't reach with the gun,
Right.
Like the Theracane is awesome, but we don't have a lot of Theracanes around the gym. But this T-spine ball has been easy. You can move it around a lot easier too. Sometimes guys don't have the necessary internal rotation in their arms and to get their arm back there to put it in the right spot. You know what I mean? So
yeah, I love the plug for Perform Better. So listening audience, performbetter.com.
Yeah, sorry.
Pick up those tools. No, it's good. I know. Chris will love it. Yeah.
That's my go-to.
Mine too, obviously, and anybody listening to the podcast will know we've had a lot of Perform Better presenters on joining me here too. Now, what about vibration plates? Because you were mentioning at the beginning of our conversation here, how you're doing a lot of um, changing the environment underneath an athlete's foot, whether you're doing movements on the hardwood, you're doing it on the foam RX pads, things of that nature. You've got wobble boards even mentioned, and now we're using massage guns and vibration. We're using the vibra rolls, vibration foam rollers. But
Yeah.
what about whole body vibration? Are you guys using that at all? Just curious.
No, I haven't gotten into it at all. Even with the Sharks, I really didn't dive into it or use the power plate or anything like that. I know there's some colleagues that have had a lot of success, with it. But we're limited in the fact that we're using more of the vibration to kind of affect tissue right now.
Yeah. All right. No worries. Okay, so we're getting close to the season. You just finished through the quote unquote summer league. Did you guys participate in the summer league, by the way?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All right.
It was long. I'm surprised. That's eye opening for me in terms of how long the process is. Like, we had a week prior to summer league called the Cali Classic. That's basically when I came on board with the team, and then we went to summer league, and that was like two weeks, right? And players who participated in that had 2 weeks off, and then they came back August 1 to voluntarily to train and prep. And we got 12 guys in town, and probably 3 of those 12 are veteran guys, which is awesome, which is great. And we're going to keep getting more. We're in another dead week here, but then we're going to keep getting more after Labor Day. So it's interesting how long it goes for basketball, because I mean, for hockey, it was like just development camp, just rookie development camp for 1 week in July. But this summer league thing has become its marketing beast, right? So,
but also, do you think, like, I'm thinking the NFL, with the NFL, you get 4 preseason games. And if we look at the injury rate of most NFL players, we're going to find a spike in injuries at the beginning of the season, especially during preseason. Partly, they're trying to stay on the team, so they're going to push it, but also because they're coming from an off season, and they're going into full play with not that much preparation in terms of many weeks. But with the NBA, this summer league, that's keeping them to some degree conditioned and fresh, right? So this is just conjecture, but would you expect to see a reduction in early season injuries because summer league is now being implemented?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I really, part of me, the one side of me says, yeah, they should come in better because they played a little bit more basketball throughout the summer. But that summer league is a little bit away. I mean, that summer league was 2 months away from the start of the season. So
Yeah.
if they keep it going, it should be fine, in theory. But the thing, I think what it does is anybody who finished the season with an injury, and needs to play and get some basketball reps in against some good competition if they're ready, summer league most certainly is valuable for that. The big question is now, okay, are they on the court too much? Are they creating? This is the other side of me. It's like saying, well, are we creating an environment that stress fractures could manifest themselves maybe in the middle of the year because they're pounding too much, right? So it's going to be interesting to dive into for me to see what the right recipe is. The equivalent recipe in hockey was like, should guys skate in the summertime? We want to give their hips and groin and stuff a rest, and we want to correct things that need to be corrected, and addressed. But that was always my kind of idea, and said, you know what, you can start playing basketball in August. But now I'm in an environment where we've been treating them through sports medicine if they need it, then coming to the gym, and then going on the court with player development coaches, because you can do that in the NBA in the off season, in your market. It's the rules allow that, which is pretty neat. So we've been doing this for 2 months, so it's going to be it's going to be interesting to see how it works out. I think I can only speak for our environment, but I think the players have benefited from it a lot, and they're fully prepared, to come in ready. They've made a huge commitment, which speaks volumes to them. The young players who know that they got to step up and support this team. So it's going to be cool.
Yeah, and you got some really great young players on that team. They represented well last year. Okay, I'm thinking about the makeup of the athlete that is the NHL player versus the NBA player. And you use the analogy of mechanics, so I'm going to go with it here. That's like being a top-notch diesel mechanic in some ways, and now you're working on an aircraft carrier dealing with fighter jets. In regards to energy systems, it's not quite the same. Of course, it's actually in some ways a little bit opposite, where the hockey players, the transitions on and off the ice, those guys, the rotations, you were just getting hard hit, fast. Can we stay fairly anaerobic for a certain amount of time, then get them off the ice, get them recovered, and then transition back on. With NBA players, I mean, some of the players are going 48 minutes. Some are going close to that, right? Without much of a break. How do you, in your head, when you're going, okay, 16 years in the Sharks, developing these programs with this in mind. Now I'm kicking off with the Golden State Warriors, and how are you wrapping your head around the difference there?
Yeah, so I'm getting used to knowing what the drill, the common drills were for conditioning, or are, excuse me, for conditioning. And to see and knowing how important that aerobic base is, and then we're measuring the load during practice, and that includes like the movements that they're doing within the practice drill. So I'm kind of getting the understanding of, okay, I know the ingredients now. I'm just trying to figure out what the measurements are for each ingredient. So what that means, Rock, is we can make recommendations to coaches if the coaches, hey, we got to, let's go half court, let's build into full court because there's more running. How intense is that? We maybe have to do more live drills where it's more competitive. That's a higher intensity. And the next day we maybe dial it back where it's just, there's no kind of player in front of you to go through the drills. It's non-contested, if you will, right? Sure. And then we're going to get a training load out of that. But when you combine, the conditioning piece on the side, the speed and agility piece that we're implementing as strength coaches, and then you have the drills, then you start to kind of bring all the conditioning elements together and in, which is great, right? So you get a really game specific conditioning, which that's what really conditions them and tops them off. And then you have a foundational aspect where you got linear speed, you got change of direction, and then you got the normal conditioning base of maybe it's just running lines, you know what I mean, for guys who need it. So
yeah, I'm
learning every single day on that, and how to measure it, and what the best ingredients are from the coaches are amazing, and the player development coaches are amazing in that they want that feedback. They want to know, if they're really not they're not driving they're not driving that race car, but they're most certainly the pit crew boss, who's talking to that driver around the track, if you will, right? So it's like, okay, how hard can he go? How many more miles does this? How many more laps do his tires have on it? So that's the neat thing, and they want that feedback because they want to dose it appropriately and actually make sure that practice plan matches up to what the conditioning needs are. They don't want to put a practice plan together and say, all right, we're going to do simulation tactical type drills in half court where I'm just kind of standing around, I'm just walking through, and we're just making sure it's more static than anything. They want to get live in half court, get live in full court, because that's what you're going to be facing, right? And there's the conditioning turnover and adaptation that can happen from that.
Sure. Yeah, makes complete sense. Okay. One or two more questions, and I appreciate the time you've given me so far, but pre-game warm-up from strength and conditioning approach, like what are the things that you do with the team, whether it's pre-practice, like before they actually get out in the court? What are some of the stuff that you want to see?
Yeah. Tissue, right? Mobility and tissue work, soft tissue work right away. And that doesn't necessarily mean getting on the table with a massage therapist. It just means that you're going to go through your foam roller routine. You're going to go through your soft tissue implement routine. And then you're going to get into just a quick burst of prep for the ankle and the calf. That may be, an iso wall sit, one leg. It may be, split stance, foot elevated off a box, a little iso kind of floating heel type warm up, maybe a few calf raises, maybe a few single leg balance, and then we can get into our locomotor kind of dynamic warm up, if you will, that will end with higher speed locomotor activities or change of direction work, right? To get their brain going and different things like that, and get their nervous system really jacked up. Maybe the final is a couple jumps and a couple med ball throws. That would be my kind of package it up, give it, install it with the athlete, and then the athlete will go kind of do his shooting, pregame. That would be a pregame kind of routine. A lot of elements of that though are included in our daily warm up before we go on the court for practice.
Yeah, it's interesting as I speak to some others in the industry. There's this inconsistency in regards to soft tissue work. I believe that it's essential, that it's important, but why do you? What's the importance of doing soft tissue? What is it going to bring about for the athletes?
Yeah, like the best analogy, and again, I go to these car analogies because if you weren't a firefighter in my family, you were a mechanic, right? So, or you did some sort of labor, right?
That's
labor.
good.
So
My family's like pipe fitters,
yeah.
So I feel you.
Yeah, there you go.
Completely
Great.
different opposite. Yeah. So go for it.
So you were a firefighter, you were in construction, or you were a mechanic. And my great uncle and my grandpa were two really good mechanics and mechanics in the Army. So, so I always use these analogies. But if you wouldn't drive your car with the e-brake on, right? Like that's everybody knows. And even I'm going to show how old I am, I guess, right, Rock? So you have to kind of reach down the center console and push the pin and put the emergency brake down, not like just press a button on your touch screen. You know what I mean? So, but you can't. You're going to cause more harm than good around multiple joint segments if you're not addressing that tissue. And some people say, well, it's more therapeutic. You're shifting into parasympathetic tone. I'm like, yeah, but yes, it could be used for that if you're getting ready to rest and promote a recovery position. But we're not on that roller for 45 minutes to an hour. We're trying to get some release and then reinforce it maybe with some length, and then we're getting prepped up and revved up again. It's too important to pass up and not do in my book.
Oh, and with the soft tissue, great answer, by the way, is that do you have specific target areas that you just have everybody cover, the big buckets, so to speak? Like if we're looking for a shortened tissue, are you going to hit psoas, hip flexor, quad region, the anterior chain, or are you going for the posterior? Obviously, you're going to look down toward the Achilles and calf, most likely. Do you hit the plantar surface of the underside of the foot? And for that matter, maybe the pectorals. Like where do you go?
Yeah. Good question. My go-tos are, and most certainly in this order, would be the Achilles and calf complex, and then flip over, and then I would go foam roller like east to west, and then you're lying on top of it, but right above the patella, and then your body kind of rolls left to right, so you get that quad tendon, and then you move it up to the middle of the quad, and then you kind of get rec fem, and then you go roll again, and then I've kind of created this bastardized version of like an ART move on the quad. Is so you're lying prone, you're still in the prone position and working on the quad. You got the roller on one leg on one quad, and the roller's high up on the hip, and then my heel is up in the air. And as I roll, like if I'm thinking of like rolling dough with a rolling pin, I'm rolling and dropping the heel and coming down to the kneecap. And then I come back, my heel comes up, roller's back high up on the hip, and then I let it go down. So
that's interesting. So you're shortening the tissue while you're rolling it? You're extending the knee?
So the equivalent is if an ART practitioner had you on the table and your leg is hanging off with your foot drooping to the ground, and then they would take their thumbs and they would press down on your quad tendon, and as you extend and do a leg extension, they would knead with their thumbs up towards the hip, right? They would knead more proximal than kind of distal. So I've kind of created that one, and that area is really important to me because I think there's I think when you see athletes who have bad, if they can't get their heel to their butt, they have bad range of motion. There's some quad tightness there. I think that's going to play into patella tendonitis or the occurrence of it coming up. So we attack that one. And then we go, external rotators of the hip. We go, legs crossed over, ball or foam roller at the glute, right? We'll do that one. And then we'll get into, I still do lateral quad. I think that's a very important one altogether, right? And then I really focus, another big area of focus is the thoracic spine, right? So we'll do the peanut or that the little larger size foam ball around the shoulders. We'll put one lacrosse ball under the shoulder blade and do a kind of draw the sword method of reaching while you're supine. And then we address the neck. And then for the pec, I'll do a combination of lacrosse ball against the wall, and you're doing this kind of one arm snow angel type thing, and around the areas of the pec. So then I will, the final on that one would be I'm supine on the bench. I have a light kettlebell, or I don't know, maybe a 20 kilo kettlebell, and then I put the bell of the kettlebell on the pec and shoulder kind of junction, and then I'll do a one arm snow angel lying supine. That's one of the. That one's better than the wall. I think it definitely hurts more, but I get a ton of our guys get a ton of relief. Yeah, so that was great. You just got to be in a good position to do it. So
very cool. I haven't heard of that one, so I'll give that a shot when we're done here.
I can film it to you and then send it over if you want.
Right on. Yeah, that's great. What about, and then just finishing up here with the soft tissue work, and then we'll close this up, I guess. But trapping the lats, like you're trapping down the pec with the ball against the wall or with the kettlebell on the floor. In terms of getting overhead reach, we need some nice, beautiful length of those lats. Do you ever take that orb, that ball, and then pin it sideways against the wall and then have them do some type of reaching? Yeah,
that's two I neglected to mention too. So side lying on the foam roller, right, to get our lat, and then the other one is after that one, and that can get pretty painful, but you're side lying with a lacrosse ball underneath the back of your shoulder but near your armpit, and then they can go into kind of sleeper stretch, which that one's pretty hot as well. So we will attack those couple that way.
All right, so you start with the ankle, you move up around soft tissue around the knee, then you hit the hip, and then the T-spine, then scapula, thoracic or shoulder region, hitting all the big buckets that way. That's beautiful. Oh, Mike, this has been great, man. I really, not only do I just appreciate every time I talk to you and connect, but I'm so excited for you. I mean, to go from being top NHL strength coach to now, with the NBA champs and leading the charge with director of performance, man. Congratulations. I'm ecstatic to see what happens this season for you.
Awesome. Thanks, buddy. It's always great to catch up with you. And I got to get down to see you there in Santa Cruz before the madness starts. So I hope I could do that.
Oh, we'll make that happen for sure. And that brings this episode of the Zealous Podcast to a close. Mike Potenza, man, Mike, I can't thank you enough for coming back, sharing what you're doing now with the Warriors. Man, it's going to be great to see what this season leads to. And for those of you who haven't started following us on Instagram, that's an easy thing to do. It's just at Rocky_Snyder. Be sure to subscribe. Tell your friends about the Zealous Podcast. And also check out performbetter.com if you want some of the tools that Mike's using with the Warriors. Until next time, hey, what the heck, I'll do a cheap plug for my own book, Return to Center. If you're interested in some of the concepts we talk about in these podcasts, you can probably find it within the pages of that book there too. Have a great week.